Today I wanted to talk about something that gets a little bit overlooked in the art community. I think it's something we all can relate to, but don't really talk about much. And it's the fact that there is a certain pressure on artists to create artwork that has some kind of meaning to it. But what if I told you not all art needs to carry the weight of an elaborate backstory or complex idea? When I started this painting, I went into it with the intention of creating something with some symbolism behind it. It's not something I usually do, but for this painting I decided that I wanted to research some bird species and some animal species and the meaning behind them in different cultures and religions. I started thinking a bit about why I had this feeling of wanting to do meaningful art. It's a feeling I've always had. I always wanted to bring out some kind of emotion with my art, even if it's a simple one, like just make someone happy or inspired or just make it pleasing for the eye. But there has been days when I felt like my art isn't really good enough because it doesn't look like something you would see in an art gallery, or like it doesn't look like the typical kind of art that people would look at and feel inspired by. And honestly, I have no idea what people think when they see my artwork, if it sparks any kind of emotion in anyone, or if it's just cute animals to them on like these pretty colored backgrounds. And that made me a bit insecure about it. I felt like maybe what I'm doing is not really meaningful to anyone. But I've been going to a lot of art exhibitions this year, and I've been seeing all these amazing artists who exhibit their art, and they always have some deep meaning behind their artwork, which I found interesting because usually when I looked at their art, I found it quite simple. It could be something as simple as a photograph of a plant, and then I would talk to the artist and they would explain to me the thought behind it and like what inspired them. And it always surprised me a little bit because it's not something I personally would have thought about when I saw the piece. This sort of drove me to want to do more meaningful art, but at the same time I ended up feeling a lot of pressure from this. I started focusing on the wrong things. Instead of enjoying making my piece of art, I started thinking, how can I make this piece of art stand out? And how can I make people see what I'm actually trying to convey? And that sort of dulled my creativity and my passion a little bit, because normally I just paint for the sake of painting. I paint because it's fun. I paint because I like to explore different techniques. And sometimes I just paint because I like to see the paint spread out on the page. I've never actually gone to art school or art classes outside of my normal school, but I've heard stories about art teachers molding students into a specific style or discouraging them from drawing the things that they enjoy to draw, like eyes or their own characters. And I think that's not too uncommon in teaching in general, where grades and diplomas and criteria very often can dull creativity and force us to take a certain path. I still remember in English class how often our teacher would have us analyze different events or forms of art. And I don't know about other people, but personally I just made things up and bullshitted some interpretation to reach a certain word count and get my good grade. And sometimes she would even tell us about her own interpretation of something, and I would often think, well, what if there is actually no meaning behind this? What if someone just made it because they were bored or doodling or liked the way that the colors looked together, and this person is just forcing some meaning upon it? And it's not to say that I necessarily hate this kind of analyzation. I think it's a great way to spark imagination and conversation, and that it is kind of the whole point of art. It's that it can mean totally different things to everyone, even if it is sometimes very far from what the artists themselves had in mind when creating their artwork. But not all art has meaning, and that's perfectly fine too. Take Mona Lisa, for example. It's one of the world's most famous paintings. A portrait of a woman who people have analyzed in many different ways. And I find it really fun because we have no idea what the artist was thinking, and if it actually had some deeper thought behind it, or maybe he was just practicing. I bet a lot of famous artists that we analyze nowadays, they probably didn't think too much about their art and just painted whatever was in front of them or whatever they were in the mood for. That's at least what I try to think when I feel this way. And I hope that I'm not the only one who has these feelings about my art, and that maybe someone will find some comfort in what I'm trying to say here. As a side note, I would actually love to hear what sort of things people find inspiration in and what inspires you to create your artwork. For me personally, I usually go on emotions, or I base my art on something that I've seen in my surrounding or heard, like a song or a place I've been to, or just some event that happened in my life. I'm thinking that I might make a separate video about it, either a short one or a longer one, where I talk about what sort of things inspire my art, and maybe even show you some examples of things that I've already painted and like the story behind them. By the way, I tried stamping a bit on my painting. I used some leaves here, as you see. This first one is just a salad leaf I found in our garden, because I wanted to see how it would look if I stamped like prints of it onto a page, but it didn't really work that well with watercolor. But it's an idea I would like to explore further, maybe with some other kind of paint. It's quite a fun idea, I think, to use natural things like leaves and such to make patterns on your art. It was actually a completely spontaneous idea. I didn't plan to do this at all, but I thought it could be fun. This painting was a lot about experimenting with my paints and trying different textures and adding, well, a lot of patterns to the painting, because it's quite empty. There's a lot of empty space and not much happening besides the little animals. So I wanted to fill it out somehow. If you recall the beginning of this video, I was scrolling through some things on my computer and writing some things down in my notepad. And that was me doing research on different animals, like I said. So my initial idea with this painting was that I wanted to make a big moose who is the protector of the forest, and I wanted to give the impression that he's old and wise. That's why he's white and laying on the ground. I actually made a painting before this one where I tried this idea, and in that painting I included some lichen on his horns, like he was overgrown with Lykan, and maybe I would have added some plants and vines and stuff, but it didn't turn out good. I wasn't happy with it. You couldn't actually tell that it's Lykan that I tried to paint, so I decided to scrap that idea and just leave him as he is. And the different animals around him represent different qualities and traits that people have in life or that they encounter as they go through life. So, for example, the owl, as many of you might know, is often associated with insight and wisdom, and sometimes even death, actually. So that was my thought behind it. Like, try to show different stages in life and maybe different things that can happen. But things don't always go as planned, and this painting ended up going a bit in a different direction than what I planned. And that's sort of the lesson I learned as I was painting it. People are complex and art is complex. I think I learned that I shouldn't overthink it too much, because in the end, people are gonna have their own interpretation anyway. And that's perfectly fine. There are times when people just look at art and see it as it is without giving it any meaning. And sometimes we give a lot of meaning to art that is actually completely meaningless, and where the artists had no deeper intention behind it. I think that's amazing. It's amazing that art can be so many different things. The beauty of art is that it does not need to follow any rules. And as a creator, you can paint because you enjoy the colors or the way the brush moves on the canvas. It doesn't need to mean something to be pretty and appealing and to make people's lives better or to make them happy. And you don't need to make an elaborate backstory or to feel some strong emotions in order to create it. Just like wind does not need a reason to blow, or a bird does not need a story in order to beautifully sing. The same goes for us observers and us artists. We don't need to understand a piece of art to enjoy it, and we don't need to have some meaning to give to the observer. Let's just celebrate art for what it is, even if it's complex or simple, meaningful or meaningless. So, thank you so much for watching this video and listening to my little rant. If you enjoyed it, please do give it a thumbs up, and feel free to comment your thoughts below. I would love to hear if people agree with me or they disagree. And don't forget to subscribe if you're interested in more videos like this or just want to see more of my art. And I will see you in the next video, hopefully.